Welcome to this webinar, the EUA webinar on institutional approaches to rights retention. My name is Vinciane Gaillard. I'm Deputy Director for Research and Innovation here at EUA, and it's my pleasure to moderate the session today. Before we start, let me remind you some housekeeping rules. The webinar is recorded. The recording and the slides will be available after the event on the platform, on CVent platform. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A tab. We have a dedicated Q&A session after the presentations, but you are also welcome to interact with participants using the chat. So you're welcome to say where you come from, etc. You will learn plenty on rights retention with our speakers, but before that, let's define a bit the rights retention term and associated terms. So, rights retention is the action to retain sufficient rights for academic works to enable them to be openly accessible and reusable, preferably immediately. So that's rights retention. What is the rights retention strategy then? It's a tool or a strategy to help academic authors retain their rights over their manuscripts. Now, if we look at what is an institutional rights retention policy, it's an expressed position setting out the practice of retaining sufficient rights for academic works of institutions' employees to make the work immediately openly accessible and reusable. And about this, I wanted just to quote Peter Suber, who is the senior advisor on open access at Harvard Library and director of the Harvard Open Access Project. He was the principal drafter of the Budapest Open Access Initiative, and he really led on Harvard being the first university in the US with an open access policy and the first university anywhere in the world to adopt as a retention policy. So what he says is that rights retention should give authors as much freedom as possible to use and reuse their own work after publication. So it's about the freedom of authors to release revised or expanded editions, to reuse articles in anthologies or monographs, and to authorize translations, text mining, and the copying needed for long-term preservation. So obviously it is all about open access today. Open access is the first priority of the EUA Open Science Agenda. It is about universal and perpetual open access to scholarly outputs in a just scholarly publishing ecosystem. The vision you see on in the dark blue rectangle is that by 2025, Europe's universities will be part of a scholarly ecosystem characterized by academic ownership of scholarly communication and publishing, and that the scholarly publishing ecosystem would be just. And we define what just is. It is a system that is transparent, diverse, economically affordable and sustainable, technically interoperable, and steered by the research community and its institutions through coordinated policies. So this is really at the core of what we will be discussing today. In this agenda, we define what EUA will do to advance open access. I won't go into the details. You have the document as a resource on the platform. But you see that there is, for instance, explicit support to the rights retention strategy proposed by Coalition S there. So this agenda was developed to address the challenges identified in our Open Science survey, published in July 2021 with 272 responses from 36 European countries. Here I present 3 recommendations related to open access specifically that come from a dedicated follow-up report to the EUA Open Science survey. First is that institutions should invest in creating the conditions for monitoring open access activities. Overall, our results show that monitoring overall is good, but there are differences in capacity and development, and most institutions do not have specific open access targets. So it's really important to have good monitoring to assess progress in achieving open access. The second is that universities should make the changes necessary to allow their researchers to comply with Plan S requirements. At the time of the survey, 41% of the respondents were preparing for Plan S, and 38% were not preparing for Plan S. And there, it's important to mention that there was a clear difference in the countries where the research funding organizations were signing to Plan S and the ones were not. So obviously, there was a significant majority of universities preparing for the implementation in those countries that had signed to Plan S, and conversely, not so many preparing in the countries that have not signed. But it's really important to remind that Horizon Europe, the Commission, is a signatory to Plan S. So if a university wants their researchers to apply and to be eligible for Horizon Europe, they should get prepared and to comply with Plan S requirements, even if the national research funder has not signed up to it. The third recommendation from that follow-up report is that universities and researchers should consider multiple paths to open access publishing. And so there it was very interesting to see that indeed universities engage in various open access activities. So it's the creation or improvement of their institutional repository. It's about training of research and staff, creating or extending open science or open access policies. Again, this is very much in line with what we discussed today. What we wanted to mention in this report is that indeed bibliodiversity and the different routes is an important element of developing a scholarly publication system that is transparent, diverse, affordable, sustainable, and interoperable for all countries and institutions, irrespective of their economic situation. As I just mentioned, Plan S, I wanted to highlight that the first principle in Plan S is about copyright rights retention. So our first speaker will tell you all you need to know about this in a minute. And then you may remember that 41% of the respondents to our survey were preparing for Plan S. So we asked those, so it's 111 universities, we asked them who is engaged in those preparations. And you can see the results in this table. So overly important contribution from library staff, and then you have administrative technical staff and research administrations, and then other categories are involved, but to a lesser extent. Before I finish, I wanted to highlight the new University Open Access Checklist. This tool aims to support universities in their effort to build capacity and further develop their open access activities. It's really a la carte approach, whereby institutions can consider the goals and actions that makes most sense in their particular context and for their own specificities. It covers three main goals: empowerment through high-level policies and strategies, capacity building through libraries and negotiating consortia, and reinforcement of existing structures through academic community-driven infrastructures. Each goal comprises a variety of possible actions and sets out their respective rationales, proposed activities, and a discussion on their expected impact and potential pitfalls. I won't go into details again. You have this as part of the material, but I just wanted to focus on the second proposed action to adopt a policy that includes a rights retention statement. So how does that work in practice? This is what our distinguished speakers will tell you, and so my role now is to introduce them all. So our first speaker will be Johan Rooryck from Coalition S. He's Executive Director of Coalition S and Visiting Professor of French Linguistics at Leiden University. He's co-editor-in-chief of the open access journal CLOSA, a journal of general linguistics. After Johan, we will hear Vanessa Proudman. She's director of SPARC Europe, a Dutch foundation committed to delivering on the promise of open access, open science, open scholarship, and open education. SPARC Europe leads the project Retain to accelerate the uptake of rights retention and open licensing to enable researchers to share their work openly. After Vanessa, we'll hear from two case studies, let's say, from universities. starting with Suzanne Tatham. Suzanne is Deputy Director of Library and Learning Services at the University of Southampton. But she will tell you more of what she did in the context of the University of Sussex. Pippin Aspaas will be our last but not least speaker. He's Head of Library Research and Publishing Support at the University Library at UIT, the Arctic University of Norway. UIT was the first Norwegian institution to include rights retention strategy as part of the open access policy. And Pippin revised the UIT open access policy back in 2021 when the inclusion of rights retention strategy was discussed. So thank you all very much for having accepted our invitation. Let's get started with Coalition S, and I'll stop sharing and leave the floor to Johan.
Thank you for introducing me, Vinciane, and thank you for having invited me. It's a pleasure to be able to speak today about the rights retention strategy. I'll share my screen and see how that goes. Does it work? Can you see my screen? I always ask.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll be talking about the Coalition S, Plan S, rights retention strategy. First, a few words perhaps about Coalition S and Plan S. Coalition S is an alliance of 28 organizations worldwide, including national funders, but also the European Commission, charitable foundations, and a number of international organizations across the world. World Health Organization, Jordan, Zambia, and South Africa are involved. The funders involved collectively about 35 billion a year in research funds and have an output of about 150,000 articles a year, just to situate the coalition in terms of its output and numbers. Plan S was devised in 2018, September 2018, 5 years ago, with one single strong principle, namely the idea that all scholarly publications from the results of research funded by these funders would be published in open access or in any way, shape, or form. So it should be immediate open access, whether it's available through a repository or through the journal or in diamond journals. It does not matter. Every paper funded by these researchers had to be in immediate open access with a CC BY license. So that was very important. We will talk about that in a minute. The Plan S initially and still has 3 routes to compliance. The first route is that the funders committed to paying for APCs in open access journals, as long as these journals were indexed in the directory of open access journals. The third route was about journals under a transformative arrangement. These are transformative agreements, as you probably know, are these agreements that are arranged by research libraries to allow their authors to not only read papers in open access, but also publish in those journals in open access. Every country has these arrangements in various shapes. And what we will talk about today, more specifically, is route 2, and the most controversial route, which is how do we make sure that authors can publish in subscription journals, but at the same time still make their articles available. And there's still many subscriptions and journals out there, and the idea that we developed was that authors who wish to publish in a subscription journal must make the version of record or the author-accepted manuscript instantly available in a repository on publication. That is simply a requirement. Now, of course, we know that it is not always that this is not always possible or allowed by publishing houses, and this is why we developed the rights retention strategy. Namely, this is indeed based, as Vinciane already said, on this principle 1 of Plan S, namely that authors or their institutions should retain copyright to their publications, and that all publications should be published under an open license, preferably the CC BY license. Now, why the CC BY license? This is because CC BY license is the license that is closest to academic practice. Namely, it is a license that allows the author to retain sufficient rights on the paper, and at the same time, the author grants the right to others to reuse the material as long as proper credit is given. That is very important. So that is why we think the CC BY license is closest to academic practice and is the license that should be used by researchers. However, in the current state of academic publishing, many researchers don't realize that they have the original copyright holders of their papers. And in fact, that is the case. I mean, when you write a paper, you are the original copyright holder. So, and it is the copyright holder, the original copyright holder, who decides how they can license their work. And we believe very strongly that open access therefore starts at the source. If the author does not sign away their rights, does not give away their rights, but grants a CC BY license to their work, that means that they can reuse all the materials in it. That's important. They can reuse figures and diagrams and also tables. They can reuse that without asking permission for the publisher. That is, I think, already a sufficient reason for many authors to use CC BY on all of their work. And secondly, they are able then to share in a repository and with anyone else. So that is another important reason. You can share it without having to ask for permission of the publisher. Now, of course, we know that authors often sign copyright transfer agreement with the publisher that prevent depositing a copy immediately. But the coalition as grant conditions stipulate that authors who want to publish in subscription journals really must deposit a copy of the author-accepted manuscript of their paper in a repository. So there is a contradiction here, a contradiction between the publisher forcing or asking the author to write, to sign this copyright transfer agreement, basically asking the author to transfer all their rights to the publisher, and I really mean all their rights on every single diagram and formulation in that paper. Whereas coalition as grant conditions clearly stipulate, look, if you want our money, you will have to make sure that all of your papers are published in open access, even those that are published in subscription journals. So that author-accepted manuscript of your paper must be in a repository immediately on publication. So that's why we developed the rights retention strategy, which requires grantees to inform the publishers that a prior CC BY license is applied to any future author-accepted manuscript arising from their submission. So this is basically a two-pronged approach, or belts, in the sense that on the one hand, the coalition as grant conditions stipulate that all the work is under a CC BY license, so that is preemptive. If you want, if the author signs this grant agreement, then they or their institution commits themselves to making sure that every work has a CC BY license on it. So that is simply by signing the contract with the funder. And secondly, of course, since every publisher will not be able to know whether the author has been funded by a coalition as funder, secondly, we ask the authors to inform the publisher that CC BY license has indeed been applied to the author-accepted manuscript arising from their submission. So again, asserting this CC BY license on their paper allows the author to retain sufficient intellectual rights. And very importantly, this last bullet is very important because it has legal implications. Since the CC BY license on the future AAM is in place prior to the publisher agreement, that CC BY license will take legal precedence over conflicting language in the later publication agreement. So a CC BY license is a license that becomes inherent in the paper. You cannot take, once it is assigned to a paper, you cannot take it away. All the publisher can do is agree to it or reject the manuscript. That, of course, is entirely possible. The publisher is entirely is entirely at liberty to reject a manuscript that comes with a CC BY license. In practice, however, this is not what we see, as I will explain in a minute. Rights retention is based on a simple principle. It's really something also that Vinciane already said, namely, the author-accepted manuscript, the intellectual creation of the authors, belongs to them. We do not believe that in order to assert that is simply the author simply has to state this. That is enough. And we strongly believe that delivering publication services is something that must be paid for. That is not the issue, but it does not entitle the publisher to ownership of the author-accepted manuscript, which should remain the intellectual property of the author or of the institution that the author belongs to. And we believe, as also something that EUA has committed itself to, namely that funders and universities should ensure that their research are not deprived of essential intellectual property rights and are prevented from really reusing their work or making it sufficiently available worldwide. That simply hampers the scholarly conversation, and that is not something that funders and universities should want. Funders and universities should not accept that any obstacles are put in the way of the widest possible distribution of work, and should preserve intellectual property rights of their authors. Now, how do we do this at Coalition S? What do we ask our authors, our funded authors, to do? We ask them to inform the publisher that they are using the rights retention strategy with templated language, the language that you see there in blue, or a variant thereof, of course. On publication, this statement allows the author to make the author-accepted manuscript open access in a repository, and if there's any problem, we ask them to contact their funder or their library, and we will sort it out for them. Now, publishers we're not quite happy with this. We had some strong reactions to the rights retention strategy, and there were a number of strategies that publishers used to thwart the rights retention strategy. So they were told that they cannot use the rights retention strategy to submit to the journal. Well, of course you can always use it. The journal can simply refuse the paper on submission. What they also said is, well, before proceeding with the submission, you must agree to pay. And this is, of course, something that some publishers have done, surreptitiously force the author to enter into a contractual agreement to pay. And I think you need to, in that case, authors should check if there's an option to discuss this APC. And publishers will sometimes ask to sign a separate contract to respect their embargo. And this is, of course, very dangerous, because they know that you have a pre-existing grant condition with the funder to publish without an embargo, and what the author should not end up with is, in fact, with two contradictory contracts. One with the publisher that says, look, you have to publish without an embargo in a repository, and then a contract that agrees to an embargo period and that forces you to be in breach of your grant conditions, which is not something that breach of grant conditions is not something that the publisher will inform you of. So these are some of the publishers' smoke and mirrors that we have encountered, but at the same time, the publishers are knowingly putting authors in a difficult situation. The contracts contradict the grant agreement. Sometimes they ask authors to delete the rights retention language from the article, which is in my view, a kind of censorship, because even if the language is removed from the article, the contract with the funder is still applicable. I mean, mentioning the CC BY license is just a courtesy to the publisher. Again, we think that publishers have the right to desk reject such article. We asked them to be clear about conditions of submission. We never received an answer to that request. But at the same time, the rights retention strategy is receiving broad support, and if you look at articles in Dimensions, we see that they have the rights retention strategy has been language can be found in many articles, and so the publishers have sort of silently accepted that in many cases. There is some resistance, of course, but it is there are now many thousands of articles that can be found with the language in it in subscription journals. And the rights retention is also receiving broad support by the UNESCO Declaration in 2021, and European Council in June 22, the G6 declaration, the EUA Open Science Agenda. About 50 universities in the UK have now adopted it or will be adopting it, 8 in Norway, CNRS in France, and UDIS, which is a consortium of 10 important research universities, have strongly recommended the use of rights retention. So really, this is something that is spreading as like wildfire across countries and institutions, and I think that is a good thing for open science and for open access. The EU Council conclusions of May 23 have also insisted on this, namely that rights retention should be a priority. So that means that rights retention has now received political support at the highest level from the various political at this political level and the ministries. It also says that non-profit scholarly publications models should be supported, and this is really what rights retention is about, right? It is about taking back scholarly control over publication, making sure that the content of scholarly publication is in the hands of the academic community. There was also a call for transparent pricing. Again, this is not against the publishers. It is really a call to the publishers to come to a new compact between publishers on the one hand and authors on the other. We want more control over the content that we publish, and of course publishers can provide services, but that is a different that is something very different. Something still about the institutional rights retention policies, namely this is also something that Vinciane mentioned, namely the idea of an institutional rights retention policy is that each researcher licenses their institution to make a copy of their AAM immediately available under CC BY in a repository, and then the university announces or informs publishers of this new regulation that takes precedence over any later copyright transfer agreement. The assignation of rights then happens automatically. The author may no longer need to add the rights retention statement to submission, so that is a good thing. It makes it easier for the author because it's a university-wide policy that applies to all authors. And rights retention policies, of course, are in a way much more powerful than funder mandates. As you know, a funder only has a temporary contract with an author, but universities are direct employers of researchers and long-term employers of researchers. And this means a rights retention policy that means that rights retention becomes a contractual obligation or a contractual policy that the author has to honor. Rights retention policies also protect researchers against publishers. If CC BY is mandated by the university, a publisher who is trying to convince a researcher to drop the CC BY license is committing a tort, namely the tort of procuring a breach of contract. That is, the tort of procuring a breach of contract is a legal term, and it simply means that if you know that somebody has a contract and you propose them another contract that is in conflict with that previous contract, you procure a breach. You are trying to make that person breach their previous contract, and that is not allowed by law. That is something that is punishable by law. And this is why I think publishers should be very careful to intervene with CC BY licenses that are being mandated by university. Finally, rights retention policies at university level ensure equality of researchers, because right now, of course, the Coalition S rights retention policy only applies to our funded authors. But if you have a rights retention policy at the university level, this protects and ensures that all articles are available open access, not just those by funded authors. And so all articles at that university will become more visible and more citable. So that is another advantage. It provides equality among researchers at the same institution. So take-home messages: article belongs to the author and should be free for them to choose for the benefit of authors, institution, and society in general. Rights retention is about ownership and control. It's not about compliance. It's not something to tick off as a researcher to please the publisher. It's really about retaining your ownership and control as an author. Rights retention strategy helps author retain their rights. we believe that key stakeholders like funders, authors, and institutions can jointly work to correct the state of affairs where authors are being denied their rights and copyrights are being grabbed for publishers. I end this presentation with some further information. You will, of course, receive this presentation in PDF format, but there's a number of there's a lot of information on our website and a number of tools that you can use on the website to further promote the rights retention strategy. Thank you. I will stop here.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you very much for the overview. Vanessa, you can get ready. In the meantime, I just wanted to draw your attention to the audience that we have a poll with 2 questions for you that you are invited to take. What is your prior knowledge of rights retention? And what is your profile, so your professional profile in a way. So feel free to take this survey. We will get back to that in a minute. And now I invite Vanessa to come on stage and to present the results and the landscape report from the Retain project.
Thank you very much, Vinciane, and also thank you very much for that great framing of rights retention, and also speaking to Peter Suber, who has really done so much work in this area for more than a decade now. So this isn't actually really new, but there is a real dynamism now in Europe to increase institutional policymaking so that we can support our authors in retaining their rights. So my name's Vanessa Proudman. I'm the director of SPARC Europe, and I'm the lead of the Retain project, which has just come to a close. But we are hoping to follow on with our work because there's still a lot to be done. So what this is all about is it's about increasing open access to publicly funded research. And we want to really ensure that authors have the right to use and reuse their work without having to ask for permission. That's the key point. And it's not just about subscription journals, it's about all journals, because we've also seen the open access journals don't have those policies in place. So although I would love to talk about publisher policies and how we believe that those need to change to support our authors, today I am going to be focusing on institutional policies and how we can support our authors based on some of the research that we've done over the last year and a half or so. And I mean, I think Johan was telling us, our authors, they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one side, they have the funders at Coalition S or other funders calling for them to retain their rights or deposit immediately their work open access. Their institutions are calling for the same, and even there are national open access and open science policies calling for that. But on the other hand, you've got the publishers who don't necessarily facilitate that. So what we can do as institutions, we can give our authors confidence that our institutions have their backs when they want to make their material openly accessible and immediately so. And there's also no need to necessarily change the law. I'm not going to be talking about secondary publishing rights, so that's changing legislation. Here, it's about how do we organize and regulate our relations with publishers going forward to make this fit for purpose. And even if we have that shared common goal as institutions, what I'm going to tell you today is that there are different flavors of rights retention. We've heard about the Coalition S flavor, and there are other institutional flavors because it all depends on the national context that you're in, the local context, a number of different ones that are essential in making this work. But as I said, there is a great opportunity now to address this challenge head on. So I think we've heard about the main challenge is really that many publishers continue to ask for a transfer of copyright from our authors or an exclusive publishing license, and they impose embargoes. So that's in conflict with what nations, institutions and funders are requiring nowadays. And there's also a lack of awareness of the disadvantages of doing so. So I think this has already been said by Vinciane, what we mean by rights retention. But I'd like to tell you about the Retain project, which is part of the Knowledge Rights 21 program funded by the Arcadia Foundation. And this is all about reforming copyright, legislative and non-legislative measures. And SPARC Europe is responsible for looking at the uptake of author rights retention activities and open licensing in Europe, although there are other important areas that we are addressing in this program. So Knowledge Rights 21, it's focused on bringing about change in copyright policy and practice across Europe to strengthen the right of knowledge to all. And it's to build on a conviction that knowledge is essential for education, innovation, and cultural participation. And we really believe that rights retention is part of that goal. So the Retain project, as I said, is one strand of the KR21 program. And we're looking at, in particular, author rights retention, open licensing, and stimulating the reuse of research publications as part of copyright. And we, as part of this study, so part of this project is understanding the landscape, and then a campaign to inform institutions, funders, and publishers and authors about our findings with recommendations. So we have, let me tell you what we've done over the last year and a half or so. In 2022, at the end of 2022, we surveyed about 150 institutions. We then, in 2023, talked to 28 institutions within focus groups. And we had also many interviews with a range of institutions from across Europe, those with policies, those without policies. We also talked to a range of funders, some of them Coalition S funders. We also talked to Coalition S, but also others who don't follow Coalition S but have other thoughts around rights retention. And we also talked to some publishers, so some of the larger publishers, and to some of the umbrella organizations. And they were very constructive discussions, but there still more needs to be done. There has been silence since our report, and we are hoping in the follow-up project to discuss more with publishers. And then we also talked to some young researchers at Eurodoc. So in addition to some desk research, we also analysed DOAJ titles as regarding licensing and copyright, following on a previous study that we've done. We got respondents in the survey from these countries, and this, I think, still reflects a year on where we see a lot of activity. So in the UK, it's the shining light, if you like, on in Europe at the moment, with more than 50 rights retention policies, institutional rights retention policies in place. And this is growing by the minute, although we know that policy takes time. In the survey, we wanted to check who are those who are really providing support for rights retention, because of course the underlying support is crucial when you introduce a policy. And we see hands down that libraries are critical in this area. There's no surprise there, working together sometimes with their legal offices, IP offices, or research offices. Sorry, that was a bit quick. At the time, which was about a year ago, if you look at the right bar, we saw that there were a few author rights retention policies in place. Probably that grey bar is now filled. It certainly is, actually. So I think there are more in development and far more in place. But as I say, there are many now across Europe considering how to introduce a policy going forward. So we are excited about this, and it's working together with peers is critical here. But what about the flavours? So if we talk about introducing a rights retention policy in your institution, it needs to work for you, ideally within your institution, within your context, within your country's legal framework. So when talking to our policymakers, we identified a whole range of different flavours. And there are others, but some that we identified. So some policies are mandates, or rather recommendations or guidance. They are part of an existing open access policy or a copyright policy, an IP one, or part of a larger publications policy or scholarly output. The content covered, in some cases, it just addresses journal articles, but some all outputs from research. Which authors should be covered by this policy? Should it just be those employed by the faculty or extended to non-faculty as well? Then there are institutions that take the opt-in approach, or rather the opt-out. Often if you're starting experimenting with a policy, you may have an opt-in, but generally it's opt-out later on. Then you have so how do you, what does the process of approval look like? That's different in every institution, of course, and absolutely crucial that you spend good time on that. And then you have different legal bases for policies, depending on the country you're in, and this is so critical, and also the type of institution that you're in. So, for example, it could relate to the rights assignment, to the institution or the author. That also relates to the ownership of that work, and also, or you'd use the method of communication, which was also mentioned by Johan. And also, are we calling for rights retention and deposit in a repository of the author accepted manuscript, or the version of record, or is it open? And also to implement that policy, some policymakers also stipulate that it needs to be deposited in a repository, or to apply specific open license. So there are a number of flavors here, and I recommend that you have a look at other policies in place when you are thinking about developing one. So some of the success factors of developing a rights retention, an institutional rights retention policy, is clearly if you have a culture of open access and a workflow where you require also deposit in your repository, that is critical. Or if you as a country require that material is made openly accessible, and that you evaluate the research based upon that. So that accelerates things for you, and this is a mechanism also that supports you in that goal, of course. What's absolutely critical is that you have access to legal advice. So either within your institution or really specialized legal experts outside of your institution who really understand copyright and the way that authors now work and publish, and to look at how that would work in your country. So that is crucial for you to find the legal framework that works for you. So Johan mentioned some examples, I mentioned others. There is a wide range. So that's critical that you look into that. And of course, the funder influence Coalition S has been crucial here. And if on a national level, even if they're not part of Coalition S, and your national funder requires you, your authors, your researchers to deposit immediately, this is also a no-brainer that this is a policy that will support your authors in complying with your funder requirements. So what the funders are requiring is absolutely essential. And it's also, when we talk to our policymakers, many were saying that it was in answer to the Coalition S rights retention policy that they felt that they had to have the backs of their authors and to support them in complying with these requirements. And I think what's also really key is for you to connect with others within your region, within your country, also to collaborate with other policymakers outside of your country. But we have seen amazing progress in the UK, for example, with the N8, so 8 northern universities collaborating and then all launching together a rights retention policy, individual ones, but together in unison and aligned. So that's really key also for success. And it also, you have safety in numbers, right? So if you can club together and work together with a number of colleagues discussing that, I think that's really key. As I've said, there's a real rapid pace of development, and I think it's a great opportunity now for us to get on that train together with others. But we mustn't forget that the resourcing implications are significant. You need to have the support mechanisms within your institution still to support your authors here and to raise awareness. Why are you doing this? What are the benefits? What are the challenges? Starting to discuss that, but also how can you support your authors if they have those questions?
Vanessa, I'm coming in because we are behind schedule. Can you wrap up, please?
Okay, I shall move on a bit more swiftly. I'm nearly there. And then we have, I've already mentioned the vital role for libraries and leadership. Just to point out that often rights retention policies are obviously tabled by the rectors or the vice rectors, but they depend very often on their knowledge of libraries to inform them. Want to make a point that rights retention isn't seen as a replacement for publishing open access via other routes, and it's important that we work together with funders and publishers. So what institutions and libraries can do: build your own knowledge base and understanding, source that legal support, as I mentioned earlier, provide institutional support to your local authors and to the journals that you support and make sure that they have relevant policies in place, and also monitor that implementation. This is all very new and we are interested to see how this will play out. I will tell you a bit more later when we come to that question on resources. SPARC Europe and Project Retain, you've probably seen the report. We have a report that's been downloaded 2,500 times, but we have checklists for institutional policymakers, things that you can think about when you develop a policy. We have a glossary on how to speak rights retention and open licensing, understanding those sometimes complex terms. And then we have a rights retention helper, and Peter Suber has also fed into this, so with some key readings and resources and some policy links. So we hope that that's helpful. Just go to the Retain website for more information, but we really hope that this has inspired you to really think seriously about implementing an institutional rights retention policy. And we would really like to hear from you what else you might need aside from what we've developed so far to help you along the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vanessa. Very, very thorough and detailed. And I think it's perfectly leads to going to concrete with Suzanne. Thank you very much, Suzanne. So you will give us like a practice case. I'll let you come in. And please feel free to share your screen.
Thank you. Are you seeing my screen okay?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Lovely. Okay, I'll start then. So yes, as you can see from the first slide, I've just taken up a new role at the University of Southampton, but my case study is from the University of Sussex, where I was working up until 2 2 weeks ago. So this is a Sussex a case study. And what I wanted to start with really is the idea of what's in your strategic plan. So in the strategic plan, open practice or open research, open science was absolutely at the heart of our library's strategic plan. And that was really, really important for us because it meant that we put centre stage that commitment financially in terms of staffing resource, that we take a strategic view of it, both locally within our institution and also globally, that we look for opportunities to innovate, but also really importantly, that we champion it within our own institution. You may not have, your own institution, you may not have an open research or open science as a major strategic objective, but if not, as a library, I think there's a really important role, for us to make sure that happens at an institutional level. But to accomplish that, we need to be influential within our institutions. We need to be trusted partners. And I feel particularly within this area, we can be really confident in our knowledge. We are experts in open access, and we have been for a long time. And we've got that knowledge of the breadth and the depth of open. So we have a voice within our institutions, and we need to make sure that we're using that voice. But you also need to understand your institution's culture, because that will vary hugely. So you need to know what approach to take, and also you need to think about the timing as well. So as Vanessa was mentioning earlier, there will be institutional differences which you need to take account of, and you need to understand those, and you need to know when to change. But the fact that we're part of such a strong community was really, really helpful for us at Sussex, and that's increasingly a useful way for libraries to develop a stronger voice and a more powerful voice. Okay, so we've gone through rights retention fundamentals already, so I won't go into detail with this particular slide. This is just a reminder of the key aspects. But what I want to share with you, I suppose, is how we've used our position of trust and influence within our university to implement the rights retention strategy. So how do we do it? Well, a huge amount of planning. We needed to understand the journey that our policy would take in terms of the governance pathway within the institution. And again, that will vary between institutions. We need to establish key milestones, ultimately working towards approval at University Senate, and then worked out, a timeline working back from that. But an important point I would make is about not underestimating the amount of time that you need for consultation. It was absolutely key. And as Vanessa mentioned as well, find out what your peer group is doing, because your university leaders will ask you this. They will want to know what is happening elsewhere, particularly within their peer group, but also at an international level as well. With that in mind, we developed a really extensive communication plan. But the thing that we absolutely prioritised was stakeholder engagement. That was key for us. And I'll go through some of these points in a little bit more detail now. So yes, it can be difficult to act in isolation. Sussex is not a big university in the UK. It's middle-sized, research intensive. But it can be difficult to act in isolation, or to even be the first mover and to persuade university leadership to act unilaterally. So having lots of universities go before us, particularly the trailblazing work done by the University of Edinburgh, and in turn building on the work of Harvard and the UKSCL and Plan S. So that was really useful for us to know that we had that to fall back on. And I just included there a link to a blog post written by the open access librarian, Sam Nesbitt, who explains in a lot more detail about the journey we went through to rights retention at Sussex. So I'm just sharing here a map produced by Professor Stephen Eglin at University of Cambridge. And again, it's just showing either the individual institutions or the consortia that have already adopted rights retention, but also several new groups or consortia that are in progress. So very much a growing movement. So yes, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how you go about engaging your stakeholders, and I suppose to make the point really that it's not a tick box exercise. It's absolutely essential, because rights retention, it isn't just a policy change; it's a really significant change in research culture, and institutional change, I'd say, succeeds or fails really depending on the quality of your stakeholder engagement. So for us, introducing this change at Sussex during a year of intense industrial disputes and trade union strike action, it was going to be challenging. We needed to be really strategic. So we targeted specific academics, especially if they were key committee members who would have a vote at key moments. We also engaged early with key allies. So those are the colleagues who will champion the policy for you. But also, and really importantly, rights retention.
Okay.
But if you have an IP policy that is in conflict, then you will need to build in a lot of extra time in your planning process. We also made sure that we heard the dissenting voices. You don't want to hear counter arguments on the day of your vote. So we addressed these concerns alongside those of co-authorship, journal rejection. We asked questions that really surfaced the issues. We knew there would be some myth busting to be done around open access. But we were very clear with our messaging that this policy is about keeping hold of your copyright, and also that retaining your rights will help you to be compliant with funder OA policy. So as OA publishing has become more prevalent, so is the focus on why authors are asked by publishers to sign away their copyright, as we were hearing earlier. And we've come a long way in the last 10 to 20 years. But copyright literacy, including an understanding of licensing, I'd say is a mixed picture across academia. With some disciplines, there's a very strong push for an open way of working. But in others, I think there are more concerns, particularly about the application of open licenses. So actually, as libraries, this is a really good engagement opportunity for us to improve copyright literacy across our institutions. Because I'd say that whilst the benefit of open access are widely accepted, not all academics feel that all aspects of open access are in their best interests. And we felt that there was always a risk with this policy that it could be derailed by arguments about CC BY licensing or intellectual arguments over copyright, and particularly arguments more prevalent in arts and humanities about the dissemination of the accepted manuscript. So we tried to keep, like I said, a very tight focus with our engagement work. And our sort of, I suppose, our more formal consultation process, there were lots of in-between conversations happening with key people because we needed to know in advance what the issues might be that get brought up. So yeah, there's a lot of consultation with individuals, but we also consulted with trade unions, faculties of research, obviously our Vice-Chancellor and the university's executive team, and ultimately our senators as well. We developed a strategy briefing for our Pro-Vice-Chancellor for research, and this really focused on the benefits and was geared to providing a lot of reassurance that we were in line with our peer group, that this was about maintaining academic freedom of where to publish, compliance with funder requirements. And really, I suppose, for individual institutions, you need to align with your institution's values and what's important to your senior leadership. So when you're writing your own strategy briefings, really that's what you need to be aligning with. We also, within the strategy briefing, explained the opt-outs, because our policy does have an opt-out. So we recognise that there may be situations beyond an author's control where it's difficult to comply with rights retention. So we would permit an opt-out from the requirement for immediate open access upon publication. However, there is a caveat. We did also make it clear that there might be knock-on effects of that in terms of meeting the requirements of future research assessment, the REF in our context. So there was a strong encouragement for all authors to adopt rights retention, but we did have an opt-out within the policy. So yeah, just a little bit now about putting our policy into practice. Actually, we didn't call it a rights retention strategy. We called it our publications and copyright policy, because I said we wanted to have a very tight focus and we didn't want it to go off in different directions. So that's what we called it. It was unanimously approved at University Senate, which we were really, really pleased about. And over the last few months, we've been notifying publishers of our policy and engaging further with Sussex authors. So in lots of ways, the hard work starts now to fully embed the policy within the institution. But I suppose I just wanted to make the point that we're convinced actually that our policy succeeded because we did a very thorough consultation and we delivered a message that resonated with our academic community. And as a library, there was a lot at stake for us. We were starting from a position of trust and confidence. So we felt we had a lot to lose if the policy had been rejected. We left books out of our policy, but we did include a clause which referred strongly to encouraging authors to assert their rights for monographs, book chapters and edited collections. That was an encouragement rather than a stipulation of the policy. And just to finish, this is the relevant chunk of our policy. I'm not going to read it out, but I thought you might like to see that, and it includes links to the policy to read it in detail. And I suppose one point I wanted to end on was really getting across the point that actually for authors, there isn't a huge behaviour change required of them. Because we've sent notices to the publishers, we've done that work at an institutional level for them. So they can just carry on with publishing as they've done. They don't need to be taking individual responsibility for that. And that certainly felt like the right way for us to introduce the policy. Anyway, I will stop now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And thank you for sticking to the time. So we actually made up a bit of the time thanks to you. So without any further ado, I'll welcome Pippin Aspaas. So we come from UK, we go to Norway. We come from a focus on the importance of engaging the stakeholders, building trust and confidence to, well, when you do that, you can focus on some elements, and you wanted to focus on the importance of the green open access route and how to clarify and demystify what is being discussed there. So the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see my slide.
Yes.
Thank you for confirming. So first then a couple of words of who I am and who I am not. I work at the university in Tromsø, UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, within the library, where I'm head of a small group working on research and publishing support for the entire university. I also have a background as a researcher and still part-time active researcher within history and humanities in general. So I have two perspectives here, and I'll return to that. So first, what is UiT? Norway is, of course, not the largest country in Europe, and Northern Norway, where I am situated, we have this multi-campus university. It was founded 50 years ago, a little bit more, and since the foundation in 1968, it has merged with several smaller institutions in the same region. So by now we have about 18,000 students and almost 4,000 employees. And together with Oslo, Bergen, and NTNU in Trondheim, we are one of the 4 largest universities in Norway. Open science has been important for not only the library, but for the university as a whole for many, many years. So 20 years ago, when open access, this term was coined, our then serving library director, Helge Salvesen, presented this in a national conference with many attendees. And it has been inscribed thanks to activism, you could say, from the library directors that we've had over the years and other people. Also stakeholders that are themselves researchers have seen the light, so to speak, and have been pushing for open science and open access in general. So this is been written in our strategy for quite some time, that we should be at the national forefront in this field. And the latest strategy that we're now following, everybody at UIT is supposed to follow what the board of the university is saying, of course, and our strategy says that we will promote openness and transparency in research, education, and innovation, and develop the field in close cooperation with national and international partners. So that with that, I thank you very much for this international meeting here and the opportunity to discuss with you. Of course, there are many routes towards open access. What we started 20 years ago was to encourage researchers to choose the up-and-coming open access journals. Of course, this has been something that has been easy whenever there was a journal that charged the author nothing, but very often they counted article processing charges. So it was very important to argue a little bit for an publication fund. So that we have had in place also now for more than 15 years, I believe, where we try and cover the charges for authors that want to publish in gold open access. We also are proud part funders of things like Open Library of Humanities, international initiatives for open access where there is no charge, neither for the author or the reader. Fairly early also, I believe that was more than 15 years ago by now, we set up something called the Munin Archive for green open access documents based on the open source DSpace. So it was in principle quite easy to set up this from the library sides, but then we needed to work on culture and get researchers to actually upload their work there, which we have been doing for many years. And also editors of journals that wanted to be idealists and charge nothing, they could come to our Septenary academic publishing setup by the library. So we have now more than a dozen peer-reviewed journals where we help them out with technical stuff and discuss publication ethics and good conduct, etc., with the researchers that use this platform. Also, I will not go into details, but Norway is, since Plan S time, we have been part of this publish and read deals. They very used to call transformative. I think that is a good word. It hasn't turned out that way for many publishers, but I think we should stick to transformative deals, not publish and read deals. Words matter. From the library side, we have a conference on scholarly publishing where we work on changing the landscape all across the world, actually, because it's in English and with many attendees every year, a hybrid conference, both streaming and in-site conference. We have a podcast series I'll return to. We do, of course, the same stakeholder engagement that was mentioned from Sussex previously. And a couple of years ago, we then adopted a rights retention strategy at institutional level. And then this, we of course announced this on several platforms. One of them was this podcast series that I just mentioned. And there we had our pro-rector for research and development saying, you can now go on, publish wherever you like and be happy. We'll make sure that it's open access anyway. So how could we come to this stage? Well, one national development also been in place for more than 15 years in this country is that we have a national CRIS system where every researcher must register their publications every year because there is some money that follows. So the institution gets some sort of reward from the government based on the number of peer-reviewed publications. And in this CRIS system, it has been for many, many years possible for the researchers to upload full-text versions of their work. There has been no money attached, but idealism has worked to a quite large extent, as I'll show you shortly. It has been important to communicate to the researchers that whatever they upload there will be monitored and checked. So it's not been put online immediately, but there are curators backstage, so to speak, that make sure that this is in line with requirements from the publishers and so on. But these uploaded full-text versions, very often there were embargo periods, and that was not in line with Plan S, also not in line with what the government was very strict. And I said that by 2024, which is now a couple of weeks ahead, by 2024, all research articles from researchers affiliated with a Norwegian institution is supposed to be open access immediately. So then embargo periods are not politically allowed in Norway. So we had to do something, and Plan S and also the national policy for open access was what helping us out in this regard. So we sat down a committee with some important stakeholders. Professor of law was one important stakeholder, of course. There were also others with legal expertise, both within the library and the central administration. And we had stakeholders, researchers, like a professor of physics, who happened to end up being the pro-rector for research and development just a couple of months later. So we didn't know about that when this committee was put down, which was certainly helpful when the committee delivered our recommendations, which were, of course, we asked Harvard University and other institutions that had done some works previously. So Peter Suhr was very helpful in explaining the rationale behind their policy to us. And we quickly found out that this prior notice that is part of Plan S should not be a necessity. This was seen as a very, very unwanted stage for each and every author. So this is not something that we wanted our authors to be forced to do. So what we just said in our recommendation was that the AAM was something that the researcher would always retain. We also said that authors are required to upload full text in this CRIS system. They can opt out if they want not their full text to be available in green open access. But it was very important for us when communicating this that no publisher should be allowed to force them to opt out, because UIT's regulation is seen as overruling any downstream contracts. This has been mentioned already. It's legal specificities, but these are very important considerations to take into account. And what we also did since this strategy was adopted here is that we now disregard the embargo periods set by the publishers. And what happened was, in Norway, we have this expression, the snowball has to start rolling. So it started rolling here from UIT, but then by the end of the calendar year 2022, all the major universities of Norway adopted their own rights retention policies, very much in line with the model policy here at UIT. So quickly we had strength in numbers, which we are really, really happy about. And now there is discussion about making this national legislation as the next step. But we started without national legislation, and we haven't had any legal cases with any publisher so far. So I'll skip this and go to some nitty-gritty statistics. So this is for UIT since 2011. You see on the left bar and up until autumn 2023. The year is not over, of course, but you can see how it has developed. And if we draw a line here with the rights retention strategy adopted since 1st of January 2022, there is not much difference to see. As you can see, voluntary opt-in has worked really well. The only problem was that we had to set those embargo periods, which the institution didn't want, the government didn't want, and the researchers themselves didn't want them. So they just continue as before. They upload their AAM, authors accepted manuscripts. The only difference is that by now we publish them continuously and immediately in this Munin archive, the institutional repository. So the important thing is with rights retention at our institution has been that this culture was in place, voluntary opt-in was in place, so there has been no big difference. So the red at the very bottom are articles that were not uploaded. It's from a total of more than 2,000 articles published per year. You can see that less than 10% are not uploaded. Of course, they should in principle be uploaded, but we are not enforcing them. We are happy with things going towards 100%, and we try and remind them to upload the articles that they have registered in the CRIS system, but some people just don't answer those emails, unfortunately. How does it look then? Just a random example. This is an article, a PDF from the publisher Taylor and Francis. You can see to the left. To the right, you can see the author's accepted manuscript. This was done voluntarily back in 2012. The only difference is the layout and the pagination, and also, as I was one of the co-authors of these articles, we made sure to put in a small statement at the bottom in this AAM, saying that what this is. It has gone through peer review and copy editing and so on, just to make the reader confident. What I think now the next stage is we need to teach researchers how to find green open access versions. And what I always tell them is use Google Scholar as one example. You get lots of help there. Of course, the easiest to find in Google Scholar is the VOR, the version of record with Taylor and Francis. I checked this out with not being connected to UIT's Wi-Fi system, and this popped up. So in order to read my own article, I need to pay $50 US. But there is also in Google Scholar, they are very good at pointing to repository versions. Actually, there were 9 different repositories where my article was available by now. Thanks to the Creative Commons license, it can always be uploaded somewhere else. What I uploaded was to the Munin archives, as I just showed you. So that is one of the, by now, 9 different versions of the PDF, the AAM. I don't say versions of the AAM, I should state out 9 different places where the same AAM is stored. So how to find them? It's not that difficult, actually. Next question then. Okay, this is just a graphic way of explaining it. How to cite them, I think also is a very, very important cultural movement that has to start now. It should have started years ago, because there are tens of thousands of green open access versions, usually AAMs, in archives, institutional repositories. Many researchers don't know how to find them, so you need to teach them that. There are also citation guidelines that don't encourage the citation of green open access versions. Actually, many journals that I've browsed through, they actually discourage it. And there are also pushback from publishers. They strive to convince authors that these AAMs are not trustworthy. So we need to push back against that pushback. And I also encountered when discussing with researchers, okay, fine, I can read the AAM, but I can't possibly cite it. and this is a prejudice that needs to be combated. So I'll just give you a small sneak peek into a small blog post article that I'm currently co-writing with Peter Suber. We hope to have it ready soon. We there encourage a kind of double citations for authors. So if you have come to a paywall and you didn't read the VOR, but you managed to find a AAM version, then tell your readers that that's the version that you used. It's important for the sake of transparency. So we suggest this extra bit, the 2 last lines you can see here marked in yellow, cited after the author's accepted manuscript, green OI version, and then the permanent link to the repository where you found the AAM. I think that is a way forward. It will help the growth of green OA, and it will make the rights retention strategy actually worth something. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Pippin. So I think that now the audience has like a full view of the principal sites, the landscape across Europe, and then 2 places. I think we still don't see Suzanne, but it's probably because of the bandwidth. Can you hear us, Suzanne?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, that's all good. Thank you. I see questions. Rita, do you want to maybe display the questions? Okay. I'm a co-author of a paper that was accepted to publication to a journal that does not support OA, not even green, and rights retention. What happens if I'm the only author out of 9 that does not sign the publisher's warranty? So who wants to take that one? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I could just mention that as UIT interpret our own strategy, we can always upload the AAM and make it available in the institutional repository here at UIT, and we take the legal responsibility in case something happens. But I would encourage this co-author to inform all the other co-authors that this is happening, because they, of course, should give their consent.
Yes. Anyone else would like to comment on this one? Yes, Vanessa, please go.
So I think, as Per Pippin says, it really depends on the context, right? So they have their authors' backs. Normally, I think all authors need to agree on that. But it's wonderful if you have a policy in place and rectors in place who really support you, and you can make that material immediately accessible via your repository.
Yes, one last thing. I mean, the author, co-author or not, should be careful not to contravene their contract with the funder. If the funder has a contract in place, then that is something that they are bound to, co-authors or not. This is not the democratic process. I'm sorry, it's not majority rules. I mean, the individual author has to know their responsibilities and act accordingly.
Okay, so I think we can go to the next one. How does notifying publishers? How do we notify publishers of an institutional policy? How do you notify in practice? Certainly for large publishers, it's clear that they need to be notified, but how do you deal with the many small and local publishers? I think that I will go to Suzanne and Per Pippin on this one. How do you work this out?
Yeah, so we had a standard letter. We had a template letter, as in a piece of paper, not an email. We posted letters to all of the publishers. And so yes, we just we took all the major ones, and then we took all the medium-sized ones and maybe some of the smaller ones that we were familiar with, because a lot of publishing took place, with some of our authors. So we, I can't remember the number, but it was a large number of letters that we sent out. And for the small ones, or for those that we've missed, we will sort of approach them, as and when we're aware of one of our authors publishing with them, and with some we would have to do it retrospectively because we wouldn't be aware of everything, particularly if it's non-funded research that people might be in places where people might be intending to publish. But we've done quite a lot of communication with the faculties around, come talk to the library about it so that we can do that work beforehand if possible. Yeah, it was actually a letter signed by the Vice Chancellor, the Deputy for Research that we sent round. Yeah.
Did you get receipt acknowledgement received?
You don't have to. You just have to know that legally. You just have to. You. That's our. We've given prior notice. That's our letter that we've sent out. I don't think we had any acknowledgements. Maybe one, a smaller publisher.
I know that it's not exactly the same at UIT, right?
That's correct. So in Norway, our approach has been that we notify the publishers with the statement on our webpage, the official webpage of the institutions. Are very clear on this. So that's the way we notify them. We don't know if this is legally bulletproof. It remains to see. But the UK approach is different, and also Plan's approach is different. They send letters. So that's a different approach.
Yes, although of course we did not send letters to every publisher on the planet. I mean, that's impossible. We sent letters, I think, to 150 publishers, and yes, but that's also because we then assume that there's this belts and braces approach where we also ask the author to inform the publisher. So, but there's for an institution, I think, I mean, you can do what Suzanne suggests, right? I mean, make reference to that letter or make reference to the website if you absolutely want to. I mean, it's not like the institutions are preventing you from informing the publishers of the rights retention strategy at the institution. So you can easily make reference to an existing website or letter.
Great, thank you. We can move on to the next question. So yeah, going back to co-authors, how do we go about disagreements? So not all of them are happy about the AAM being published, or not happy about universities or libraries forcing them how and where to publish. So I think that's, my understanding is that there is no forcing whatsoever, but you may want to comment on that.
Yeah, I could just comment. We have some experience on that, of course, and sometimes where there are disagreements, it can even happen that some of the corresponding author, for instance, refuses to share the AAM with any of the co-authors. That's a pity, but it can happen. So I think some of the 160 exceptions from last year were such occasions where a UIT author was just one out of 150 authors on such papers. It can be really hard to actually get the AAM and put it online. But if they had Plan S funding, Coalition S funding, they would have to make it available in open access. There was no way. So that's the thing we monitor.
Yeah, it's a contractual obligation. So it's not optional.
Plus, actually, my understanding was indeed that with the rights retention strategy, it allows and it enables and empowers authors to publish wherever they want. So it's actually enabling and empowering researchers and not forcing them or limiting their freedom in any way. It's the contrary. I see you all nodding on this. Okay.
So just to make the point for non-funded,
it's to having the freedom of selling your kidneys, right? I mean, why would you want that? I mean, to put it a bit crudely, I mean, there's a reason why we don't allow people to sell their kidneys. There's a reason why we don't allow people to give away their rights.
Suzanne, you wanted to come in there.
Oh, I was just going to say that for non-funded authors, there are opt-out policies as well. So it's not that, we'd be encouraging them to opt out, but if there is a disagreement with the co-author for non-funded authors, then certainly the policy at Sussex allowed for an opt-out. But not trying to encourage people to opt out, but just as an option.
Okay. Thank you so much. So we are reaching to the end of this webinar. Before we close, first of all, can I ask the speakers to just check the questions, the approved questions that are remaining, and if they invite them to type in their answer, it will be available and visible to everyone. And then while you do so, I can take a round of 1 minute, not even 1 minute, a very one tip that each of you would say. What is the most important thing if you are an institution, you want to start this process, but you don't know where to start, you don't know what to do? What would be your advice? I'll start with Per Pippin, because you're the first one I see.
Thank you. If you are from an institution that consider adopting such a policy, I think to try and get the right stakeholders on board is extremely important. So it's not something that you can do from strictly library perspective or strictly legal perspective. You need to get the professors with the right standing within the academic community on board, and often these are identifiable. You know them already, and get them to speak your case along with you. That's my first take-home message.
Okay, the right people. Suzanne.
Yeah, similar really. You need to find out the key people within your institution, and you need to be able to make a really clear case. Yeah.
Thank you. We are going backwards. So Vanessa is next.
So I think what's really critical is that you look within your institution, look at your policy stack, look at the IP policy, look at your open science policy, look at the employment contracts that you have, who actually owns the content. So looking at the legal frameworks and inform yourself there, really understand that properly, and then open up the discussion based on what you know about what you have already. And then there are a whole load of steps that come after that, but I think that's really key.
Okay, thank you. And Johan, you're the last.
Yes, my advice would be keep an eye on the big picture. This is really not simply about compliance. It's really about who owns who owns the papers and the research results. And I think we should really realize much more fully that we as researchers own that content, and we own that. The reason we own that content is to make it available for everybody to share and to make it reusable. That is the big picture. That we should always keep in mind. We're not doing this just to tick off a box. We're doing this in the interest of science and of society.
Thank you all very much for your presentations and for the discussion. So my own take-home message from this is that from what you all just said. So it's about why is it that we do that? How is it that you can do this initially, and then get the good people on board to get a good community. So with this, I will close. I hope that the 71% of the audience who wanted to know more about rights retention will be pleased with this webinar. And I'm happy to close this session. I thank you all very much for your contribution. And I thank very much the support we got from Julia and from Rita from EUA Secretariat. Have a nice end of year and a good start of the new year. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.